the weirdest overlap I had with journalism and my career came last year. I'm in Rust. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so
Are you really? Oh my gosh, I didn't realize.
yeah. And so the weirdest experience I had with journalism, and I remember thinking it at the time, was is we were on that movie. We had this horrible fucking accident and this horrible tragedy, and our DP
Were you
died
there that day?
Yeah, I wasn't in the church, but I was at base camp. Yeah, it's some shit. That's a whole.
I can't even imagine.
Oh,
that was such a tragedy.
It was brutal. It's a whole other conversation. But what happened was, immediately, like that day before we knew anything, journalists have a job to do, and so they're coming after everyone on the production,
or like poor safety controls or something.
But they're just coming after anyone to get the story.
They were writing you saying, "Will you talk?" Anonymously.
Yes, they're reaching out to everyone they could get a hold of. But we are humans going through a really confusing, traumatic tragedy.
Yeah.
And we're in this experience where, I mean, this does not happen on movie sets. This is so fucking rare that someone should die on a movie set. It's not an outcome that you think is possible. So we as humans on this project are dealing with trauma.
Unimaginable shock.
And yet journalists, I get it's their job, but they're reaching out to people trying to get the fucking scoop.
Right.
And it felt so gross because the only people speaking in the early days, like right after this happened and the day of, the only people speaking, there was only a few people willing to speak to a journalist at the time. Half of us couldn't even see straight. Like we were trying to process what the fuck was happening, let alone talk to a journalist. So the only story that the journalists were getting were from a very small
just
group of people,
like threads of
and
light.
some disgruntled people, and some people had some shit to say, but they're not getting the whole story because they can't, because most people aren't talking to them. And it was very surreal, like going through this personal trauma while getting reached out to by like the LA Times and not knowing how to deal with that. And I understand the journalists aren't inherently bad people, but at the time it felt like, you're fucking bad people. Like, do you understand what we're, like, that you're calling people who are going through something unimaginable and are in deep pain? And of course they're like, you know, whatever, like they try and be empathetic, but like you can't if you're trying to get information out of this.
I think this is complicated. I think two things. I think one is, you know, in any kind of rapidly moving situation when there is a tragedy going on, as a journalist, you know, you have a lot of decisions to make, and you have to sort of ask yourself, what kind of reporter do I want to be in this situation? We do have to serve public good and make people understand what is happening. But I think there's often a loss of the question, why? Is it to get the inside gossip, or what drama went on that day, or were there signs, someone dropped something, or someone said, hey, you know, don't touch the props, whatever. I mean, because this was a terrible tragedy. Or is it because the question why should then become, well, we need to very quickly understand what confluence of events or who dropped the ball to allow this woman to die, you know, in effect. And I think sometimes we get drawn to, as, you know, reporters or storytellers, very much sort of gossip and drama, much more than really asking the question, what benefit can we serve by contacting these people? Or, you know, who are we trying to hold accountable here? Or how can we prevent this from happening again by exposing what series of events went on? So sometimes it's really about kind of framing, what's my role here? You know, the other part of this is I spent a lot of time covering the Parkland shooting, which was a horrible event in 2018, as you well know, in Florida, where I'm from. You know, 17 people killed, students and teachers. And I covered it when it happened. And then I stayed with the story over the course of several years. And I went back to Parkland in early 2020 before COVID and spent a month there interviewing like dozens of people, dozens of parents, children. I mean, I went to a cemetery where students, it was very, very painful. Teachers, I went to the school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, where all this went down. And the goal was, 2 years after the shooting had happened, to paint a picture of 6 teachers who had become, you know, sort of unofficial social workers or real pillars of support, of strength for their students. And what I learned in the course of doing that was so much about trauma-informed reporting, which is something that's gaining more steam in the industry, but is really not there to the point that it should be. And you especially don't see it in the local newsrooms. Like when I was talking to Parkland survivors and students that were in these classrooms where bullets came in flying through the windows and, you know, just saw like unspeakably horrible things that I don't want to say here, you know, because we have viewers watching, but like really horrible stuff, was they understood the purpose that journalists were trying to serve.
Yeah.
But so many, especially like local news reporters that are just told by their editor, you better get down there and, you know, bring me something in an hour, you know, something like that.
Right.
Hopefully not in that, you know, horrible voice, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But so many editors and people that dispatch people, there's very little regard for what impact will I have waving a microphone around or trying to reach people who are in a traumatized state of duress. And am I going to intensify that trauma? Or am I serving a greater purpose here where I can mitigate harm to that person, but make them feel that they do have a role in the greater good of holding someone accountable or preventing a tragedy like this from happening? So we can't lose sight of that. And we just got to do whatever we can to teach people. And I am, you know, sorry that you were part of that group of people that felt under siege, because it feels like you're under siege.
Oh, it was brutal.
Not only are
it
you,
felt
is your
very unsafe
brain trying to catch up with this rapidly moving, horrific series of events, but at the same time, you are trying to come to terms with just being like bombarded by people who want things from you, and who probably you felt only want to know what you know and then are willing to use once and throw away kind of a thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. It's just like, you don't know me, so no matter how much you like feign or really have some human compassion for me, you don't know me at all. So like, you need your info.
Right.
And you need it now because this is a big story.
Yeah.
But like, no one wants to talk right now. Like, I can barely fucking think. Like, I can barely wake up.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was strange. Even the night it all went down, like our second AD's phone number was on a call sheet that got leaked. And he was still working while this tragedy was happening. He was a second AD. He had to like help work. He had to help deal with things. And he said his phone didn't stop ringing all night, like into the night. But then I get the journalists are coming from their job. They're coming from what they have to do for their job. It just meets this weird human traumatic
Look,
place.
it's painful. And that's why sometimes, you know, there are stories like that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
You know, other times there are when I feel like I can add value.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are, we call it like running into the burning building, you know, and sometimes you really feel you can, but trust me, there have been those that I've said, I'm going to sit this one out.
Yeah.
And I don't think that makes me any less of a journalist. You know, you get these people that think, I'm going to go for any story and chase any story. And I learned early on in my career, not every journalist is right for every story.
Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes there are moments like that where I don't want to be part of that first wave that's re-traumatizing or causing unnecessary pain.
Yeah.
And others, if that's what they want to do, can go and do that. You know, I may hang back till the next day, the next week, the next month, till I find an angle or a story that I think I can uniquely own and do well and figure out how to report. There are other times when the building is burning, a financial story or a media story or a business story where I say, I've got to go.
Yeah, you got to get it now. I get it.
But the kind of like horrific tragedy that you went through hopefully is a rare incident for most people on the receiving end of journal. I mean, I've been contacted by reporters myself over the years wanting to know about, you know, what is it like to be a young actor? What is it like to work at X, Y, or Z media company?
Sure.
And oftentimes I just ignore, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But you know, I have not,
instinct.
thankfully, had to experience the kind of outreach and coming at you that you had to. And hopefully it's such a rare, fluke, horrific event that you never really have that again.
Yeah, I hope never again. It did shift how I'll receive any story about a kind of chaotic mess of a human situation. Because what was reported on, the story that was reported, for me, didn't feel like the whole picture of what was happening and didn't reflect my experience on it at all.
Interesting.
So it also shaped like, okay, so when I'm reading a story like this from the outside, I need to know there's probably some perspectives that aren't being shared, and this is being written off the information that they have.
You can get.
but is not all of the information. And it really is going to shift how I receive like news from here on out.
And sometimes, I mean, that's a very insightful perspective. And sometimes that bothers me too. Like, you know, we'll try and get into a complicated or difficult situation and start unpacking what's going on. And we'll talk to people that engage with us. And we give everybody a chance to talk, especially if we're writing about someone or a series of people at the heart of something. You know, you want to go to them and you want to give them a chance to have their voice heard, whether it's now or later down the road. And oftentimes they'll say no because the situation is rapidly developing and maybe they can't talk for legal reasons or whatever it may be, or they're just not prepared at that moment to speak. But like for me as a storyteller, I know sometimes I'm like, okay, we got a lot, but I know there's so much here that we're still not touching. Or we got the tip of the iceberg and it may be a very interesting tip of the iceberg, but the rest of the iceberg is out of reach for us. And you go with what you have, but you're like, you know, like I wish we could have figured out the real full story. And that's the great pain of a journalist, is learning when to let go too, because look, there may be stories that come out over the years about Rust or Parkland or any tragedy that take years and years or months and months to report. But, you know, sometimes that's just not gettable in the early rounds of history as they're being written.
For real. Yeah, you're not going to get every piece of information.